Welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Dean. This show is for women leaders who are committed to advancing both their own leadership and the leadership of those around them. In each episode, I offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help you become a more confident, compassionate, and curious leader. The truth is, you were born to lead. So let's start now, together. Hello, Shameless Leaders. I'm so excited about our conversation today. This conversation came about because someone's information landed in my inbox, and a thing that I normally don't look at, I happened to look at, and I was like, oh, wait, there's something here. So I got an email about Lauren Tetenbaum's book, Millennial Menopause, Preparing for Perimenopause, Menopause, and Life's Next Period. And when I got the email, I started reading through it. And usually I don't accept cold guest pitches. And I was like, no, this one's important. And so I was excited to invite Lauren to come on the show. And as the universe would have it, there were some big things happening in the world in the United States the day that we recorded. And I went into the conversation a little like, I hope we're on the same page with things. And we ended up both having that kind of reserved thought about each other. And by the end of our conversation and being able to talk in our pre and post interview, we were like, oh, okay, we are each other's people. This is amazing. So I'm really excited to share this conversation. Lauren is someone who works in the space of millennial menopause, but also workplace advocacy around menopause and perimenopause. And I know that these are conversations we need to be having more often. And I feel like in a year or two, these are going to be way more commonplace conversations. The awareness that is being spread and the pace at which it is spreading is really exciting to me. When we have something that impacts 50% of the population, but it's rarely spoken about, something is deeply wrong. And that's the situation we've been in for many generations. And we're starting to wake up, open our eyes, and recognize that when something impacts 50% of the population, it impacts all of us. And we need to be talking about it in all the places, including the workplace. And so I'm really excited to be talking about workplace advocacy around menopause and perimenopause and what that looks like in terms of accommodations and benefits. But I also am really excited about just opening up this conversation for these kinds of conversations to be more normalized. So with all that, let me tell you a little bit about Lauren. Lauren Tetenbaum is a licensed clinical social worker, women's rights advocate, writer, and mom dedicated to supporting and empowering women through life's transitions. With experience as both a lawyer and a psychotherapist, Lauren specializes in counseling women navigating identity shifts related to motherhood, career, and reproductive health. Lauren frequently contributes to thought leadership in the form of media and to professional organizations. She's now the author of the 2025 book, Millennial Menopause, Preparing for Perimenopause, Menopause, and Life's Next Period. We talked about a lot of things in this conversation, so listen in to hear Lauren share why reproductive health care is a workplace issue. It's not just a household issue or a mom issue or a woman issue. She also shares the perimenopause and menopause symptoms that impact women at work. And then we talk through what is the trickle down of that? She talks about accommodations that workplaces can make to support women in menopause and perimenopause that benefit lots of other people too. And this is what we know. When there's an accommodation that benefits one person, it's often something that benefits lots of different kinds of people. She talks about benefits in terms of benefit packages that workplaces can add easily to their existing benefits package that can easily improve healthcare access for midlife women. She talks about how and when to prepare for perimenopause instead of waiting for it to hit you, so to speak, and especially waiting for it to hit you in a way that really takes you out. And so she talks about being proactive and being on top of your healthcare in a more proactive way, which is so powerful. Don't do what I did and wait till it took me out to figure out at age 49 and a half. She talks about the costs that we see for employers who are choosing not to address perimenopause and menopause in the workplace. So we're starting to see employers who really are addressing this and digging into this and offering benefits and making accommodations and really bringing this into the conversation in a very active and proactive way. And there's great benefits to that. And we're also seeing the costs for the workplaces and employers who are not doing that. So she shares a bit about that. And then we also talk about how men can advocate for menopause-friendly policies, education, and accommodations in the workplace, and why it's so important that men do that. So this is a great conversation. I know you're going to learn a lot. You're probably going to take some notes. You're going to definitely want to go get Lauren's book, Millennial Menopause, and dig into all of that. You might want to share it. Give it to a few friends, give it for holiday gifts. So with all that, please join me in welcoming Lauren to Shameless Leadership. Lauren, welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Before we hit record, I was telling you, we recently did an episode on, or I recently did an episode on my own experience, which I've talked about a couple times in perimenopause, and then more recently, kind of into the more official menopause realm and starting HRT. And when I talk about this topic, people just come out in droves in terms of all the things they want to talk about related to perimenopause, which I think is great because it shows just how, first of all, how open we are to this topic now in ways we did not used to be. It also shows that women are really committed to getting better support for themselves, which I love. And it also shows the impact that like this is something that is so significant and we are unwilling to be silent about it any longer. So I appreciate that your team serendipitously reached out around the same time that I was talking about this on my own. And I was like, yes, this is a perfect continuation. So thank you for being willing to bring yourself and also your new book on the show to talk about.
Thank you. My pleasure. And yes, I love to hear that. I think it's really cool that women are becoming more open about these issues because we have to be.
Yes, yes. So your book is called Millennial Menopause. And which, if you're watching on YouTube, you're holding it up right now. I'm laughing because I match your book.
I
Not
know.
on
I
purpose.
was thinking that.
So I'm in my hot pink shirt with your hot pink book cover.
Love it.
So well coordinated. So perfect for today. So I want to dig in and talk a little bit about, I'm going to start with what inspired the book, and then I want to talk about menopause and reproductive health care as a workplace issue. But before we get into that part, what inspired the book? Because I'm guessing there's some backstory there.
There is. So by day, I am a mom of two and a therapist specializing in women's reproductive mental health. And whether it's because my kids are young or my areas of interest, I have been focusing on the perinatal period primarily in my work. And I was about to be 39 and realized I knew nothing about menopause. And I thought, I think I should learn a little bit about this. I met Ann Fullenwider, who's the co-founder of Alloy, a women's telehealth platform for women in midlife. And everyone in the room was talking about how they wish they had known about menopause, perimenopause, the treatment options, the resources. And they were really pissed off that they didn't know. And I thought, well, I have to tell everyone my age and my generation so that we can proactively prepare.
I love that. And I think, tell me if this is, I'm curious your experience. So did you say you're currently 39?
Now I'm 40.
Okay, so I'm 49.
Mm-hmm.
And my perception of perimenopause and menopause until like a couple of years ago, when I was like 47, 48, was like, oh, that's like for 50 plus. Like it felt like it's still way out there. And when I think about my mom, she was not 50 plus when she started experiencing symptoms of perimenopause. But in my mind, she was like, quote unquote, very old. And I think I assumed that she was more in that 50-ish realm, even though she was not, because when you're like 5 to 15 years old, everyone's 50, right?
Totally.
So I had this very skewed timeline in my head around when this starts to impact a woman's life. And I think that we're recognizing it's earlier than we thought. And many of us are already there. And some of us are like, oh my gosh, we're like practically through it. And we didn't even know. We just think we've been like miserable for a long time for no reason. So I'm excited that there's so much awareness about the earliness that this starts impacting women's health and that we can start to get care in a way that is impactful so much earlier than 50.
Yes, absolutely. And you're not alone in thinking that. And I didn't know much myself. I certainly didn't know that symptoms commonly start in one's late 30s, early 40s. I definitely didn't know that they can last several years. We've seen a lot of studies showing 7 to 10 years. So since the average age is 51 of menopause and perimenopause, if we're saying it can last 7 to 10 years, in one's 40s, one should know about it, right?
Right. Definitely. So let's talk about if this is something that impacts all women, then it's obviously having a huge impact in every environment that we're in. And I was actually just talking with a girlfriend about, as I'm thinking about my 50th birthday in November, and what does one do for their 50th birthday? And we were talking about this particular season in life at a certain age where you have this intersection of your work life, your community life, your personal life, your kids' lives, school lives, sports teams' lives. Your network is vast and your hands are in 1 million things at all times. And in this context of this conversation, I was like, I don't know what to do for a 50th birthday because I feel like, do I invite 500 people to a 50th birthday party? I don't know. Not because I'm so popular, but just because we have our hands in so many things. So my point being, when we are in so many different circles in this season of life, in this 40 to 50 age range, navigating perimenopausal symptoms, as we're navigating all those realms, the impact is so wide. We're showing up in all of these spaces in this unfamiliar version of ourselves and trying to get through being quote unquote like normal, even though we feel like a new, different, and maybe more complicated version of ourselves. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. And I see it all the time in my personal and professional life. And first of all, I have ideas for your party, which we can talk more about later. But I like to do a girls' night with big things like that, and maybe like a karaoke night or a big slumber party.
That was what karaoke night was on the list for sure.
Yeah. Because you have to celebrate, you have to have fun, because life is so busy and we're tired, and maybe it's because of perimenopause, maybe it's because of life, but certainly perimenopause plays a role. Even though every woman will experience menopause differently, the common symptoms can be hot flashes, fatigue, mood issues, and so of course those symptoms are affecting us in our interpersonal relationships, in our mental and physical health, and at work.
Definitely. Definitely. So let's talk about reproductive health care as a workplace issue. Dig into that. I know this is like the meat of your passion. So I'm going to let you take it from there and share with us why this is a workplace issue.
Yes, it absolutely is a passion of mine. And some people don't see the connection. They think reproductive health is a private issue, which I certainly understand. But in our country, in our culture, the workplace is often the source of our health insurance coverage. It's where we spend most of our time. And so, of course, we are full human beings. And when we show up at work, whether that's in the office or remotely, we are navigating personal issues like menopause symptoms and also pregnancy, parenting, etc. And that sort of sparked my journey as a workplace policy advocate. I successfully helped change the parental leave policies at 2 different law firms I was working at in another life. And when I started learning about menopause, I realized that this was the next era, not only for me as a millennial, but for workplaces to offer better support for their workforce, which is the largest growing demographic is people in their 40s. So women in perimenopause.
Exactly. Exactly. And can you talk about, you mentioned symptoms of perimenopause a minute ago. Can you talk about how symptoms of perimenopause and menopause impact a woman's professional life? And I think this is important for women to acknowledge so that we can feel seen and feel less alone. Because I think a lot of times we feel like it's just us, even though it's many of the women around us. But I also think for men to understand that this is what we're dealing with on any given day. Like there's some of the weird and strange things that we might be navigating and trying to keep at bay so that we can also be our fullest version of our work self.
Absolutely. I will talk about the symptoms, but I do want to give a caveat that they don't make a woman incapable or worse at doing her job. There just might need to be tweaks to her schedule or whatever it is, the uniform that she might be required to wear that help her do her job optimally while she's navigating these symptoms. So menopause is not a disability or a problem that makes her a bad employee. It's just something that we have to navigate.
Right.
So some of the symptoms, I would say that probably one of the biggest ones that I see, both in terms of frequency and impact on one's ability to show up at work, is the sleep disruptions. If you don't have quality sleep, you're in trouble. It's going to impact you physically, mentally. It, of course, exacerbates mood symptoms like sadness, teariness, irritability. It exacerbates the brain fog, which I have had women tell me they've quit their jobs as doctors, as CEOs, et cetera, because they can't remember things. So we got to work on sleep. when it
Right.
comes to the menopause transition and in general. And certainly other physical symptoms like hot flashes, those are easily dealt with when the workplace provides reasonable accommodations like access to a refrigerator, access to cold water, frequent bathroom breaks, access to a thermostat, maybe a cooling room. And all of these symptoms, whether they're mental, emotional, physical, they can be helped and supported by a workplace if the workplace offers access to and coverage of menopause specialist healthcare.
Mm. And can you explain what menopause specialist healthcare is? Is that just
Sure.
my normal doctor or is that something different?
It is probably not your normal doctor. So, because of, I won't go into too much of the history, but in 2002, there was a study called the WHI that has been essentially misinterpreted to say that hormone therapy is dangerous.
Oh,
As a result, that was about 23 years ago, an entire generation of healthcare providers were not taught about hormone therapy. And
right.
so, for our mothers and the women before us, they were essentially told, suck it up. This is midlife. Move about your day. And we've seen the impact. We've seen that women are quitting their jobs because of menopausal symptoms. 1 in 10 women we've seen from research quits her job. We've seen that women are not going to work. Absenteeism costs the US economy annually $1.8 billion because of menopausal symptoms. So, luckily, fortunately, it's not luck, it's the result of a lot of hard work of advocates and healthcare providers in this country. We are seeing more providers seek out their own training in menopause care, and they are available. So, a lot of workplaces can partner with clinics like Progeny or other healthcare providers that offer specialist menopause care. Healthcare providers can also be the town doctor who is a menopause specialist, but we want the workplace to cover them if they're out of pocket, things like that. So there are so many ways that workplaces can collaborate, but I would say that as the patient or the employee, if you are looking for menopause specific care, do look for a specialist, and you can easily find one at the Menopause Society's list of directory.
I love this point. This is something I've had so many conversations with friends and since talking about this on the podcast, listeners of the show as well, that we think, well, I just need to talk to my quote unquote like regular doctor, so my gynecologist or my primary care doctor, et cetera. And what I'm telling people over and over again is maybe,
Probably not.
but probably not.
Yeah.
And so I'm telling people I'm lucky that my primary care doctor does specialization around this. And
Mm.
she just happens to be someone who's added that to her specialty over the years since I've been seeing her. But I'm telling people specifically to look for a doctor that specializes in working with perimenopausal and menopausal women. It reminds me, I was in the fitness industry for many years, and I would have clients come to me and they'd be like, well, I talked to my doctor about nutrition, or I talked to my doctor about exercise. And this is not about like crapping on doctors, but
Totally.
doctors are given so much education and then they specialize in one
One
of many
thing.
things. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so the nutrition or exercise advice that they were giving my clients was based on like a nutrition class they took 30 years ago, which
Right.
isn't necessarily relevant anymore, or like
Exactly.
exercise recommendations from 30 years ago. Same thing with doctors primary care providers and gynecologists, they have been given education in one realm,
Mhm.
but not necessarily anything more than like maybe a mention or two in the course
Right.
of schooling, again, decades ago, about perimenopause and menopause. And
Exactly.
so I think it is essential that you are working with someone. If you want to be an advocate for your own healthcare, you need to be working with someone who has a specialty in that area.
Mhm.
And even if you don't choose to do HRT, someone that can talk to you about if it's why it would not be a good fit for you.
Right.
Um, yeah, go ahead.
At the very least, someone who says, I'm not sure, I will look into that for you, or let
Yeah,
me refer you. You don't want
right,
someone who says, you're too young for that, or we don't do hormones here.
right.
That's dismissive and unacceptable.
Totally. Totally. And thank you for mentioning dismissive, because I think that's what I hear happening so many times is like, well, my doctor says I'm not ready for that, or my doctor says
Mhm.
this isn't perimenopause or whatever. Like these little dismissive things whenever you feel like a medical professional doesn't meet you where you're at, that's a sign that that's not the right medical professional for you. And I had that experience in health. Thank you for the clapping. I had that experience in my 20s, asking some questions about being on the pill. I had been on the pill for a long time, and I asked some just really basic questions. And my doctor at the time was like, "Oh, you don't need to worry about that. Like, that's not," and just like really blew me off. And I was like, no, I do want to know
I'm
more about this.
curious. Yeah.
And it was like one conversation, and I was like, I'm out. Like,
Good for
if you
you.
can't answer my question, and that's when I found my current doctor I've been with for so long now. But yeah, I think that when we are not the expert, we are quick to trust experts who have more authority than us and have more power than us. And sometimes that's misplaced trust. So
Totally agree. And of course, like you said earlier, this is not to say that doctors have malintent,
right.
but they often are not trained and pressed for time. And so as soon as you do feel like something isn't quite right, you deserve to be heard and to be presented with information so that you can make the best decision for yourself.
Absolutely. Okay, so then when should women start seeking support for perimenopause and menopause? Do we wait until we are not sleeping, we're sweating all the time, we're really cranky and tearful, and our hair is falling out? These are all things I've gone through, by the way. Our hair is falling out by the handful. Do we wait till we're there, or are we being proactive in a different way?
So my hope is that all millennials, for example, so women born 1981 through 1996, get my book and start preparing now. And what do I mean by that? If you're not having symptoms, that's okay. You don't necessarily need a medical professional, but it is good to know your body, know your mood, know what's coming your way, start implementing things like strength training into your workout regimen, have a healthy diet, see your friends for cognitive and mental health issues, and understand what it might look like when things do start changing so that you're not totally caught off guard.
Yeah.
And I like to say, assemble your team, know where you can find adequate resources, know that mental health is a major component of the menopause transition. And so maybe you do want to talk to a therapist before or just have one ready to be available to you during. And then when it comes to that real need of needing to see a medical provider, I would say as soon as you don't feel good, absolutely get help. I will also say you don't need to wait until you're suffering to
Right.
get help. If something just feels off and you don't like it, make that call.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed, and this kind of goes back to my point around like having our hands in so many things in a certain season of life, is for myself and for many people around me, is we get really good at attributing the way that we're feeling to external circumstances. And so we're thinking, well, my kid's struggling right now and my work is really stressful and the world is messy. And so, of course, I'm not sleeping well. Of course, I'm cranky. Of course, this, and this. And we externalize the causes instead of recognizing like, oh, wait, maybe I'm not fully equipped to deal with these situations right now because of where I am hormonally. And I know that I've done that multiple times at different points and then kind of come to a breaking point of like, I think something's really off. And then my doctor being like, something is like really off and you could have come to me earlier. But I was like, yeah, but I just kept thinking it was a tough week. So I'm assuming you see a lot of that too, where we're not good at listening inward. We're more focused on external factors and thinking that those are the causes of our symptoms rather than our hormones.
Absolutely. At the risk of using a term that gets thrown around a lot, I think we gaslight ourselves, right? And we say things like, well, of course I'm tired and have low libido. I'm a mom and I'm exhausted. That all could be true. And certainly hormones won't treat a toxic work environment or your kiddo who won't go to bed. But I like to treat the symptoms. And I love that your doctor said, please call me as soon as you feel something's different, not when you're really in the throes of it.
Right.
And I think that speaks too to the need to talk about these issues in the workplace before you urgently need a change in policy, which is why I think millennials and younger women and men and allies and women of all ages needs to be advocating for benefits related to reproductive health care always now before you're desperate for it and frankly likely to leave because you
Right.
just can't add one more thing to your plate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that it's common that we get to that breaking point. And
Hmm.
I've seen that in a number of my executive coaching clients, and actually just in calls that I've been on this
Yep.
week alone,
Yeah.
um, where a situation happens, a work situation happens, something stressful happens, and a person is ill-equipped to handle it
Mhm.
because of untreated things happening from a hormonal level. And it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be
It
that
doesn't
way.
have to
That,
be that way. Yeah.
yeah, like we can navigate stress better if our hormones are in the right place. And I know I went through a situation last spring, and I
Mhm.
recognized very much that I was having this like disproportionate emotional response. And I even told a couple girlfriends, I was like, I know I should not be crying about this for 3 days, but I can't stop. I'm like, and I was like, it's just been a long year. And in hindsight, when I went and finally asked my doctor about doing some blood work, she was like, you have like zero estrogen. And then I went into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT was like, you might be feeling really hopeless and helpless and tearful. And I was
Check,
like,
check.
yes. And I thought, oh my gosh, I could have handled this situation, like maybe cried for, an hour instead of 3 days.
Yeah.
Like I could have handled that stress totally differently, if I had some understanding of what was happening. And so kind of back to your point around being proactive, is understanding that if we do nothing, we're probably going to end up in a situation, or if our workplace provides no support, that we're
Right.
probably going to end up in a place at some point where we have uh, um, almost or maybe totally a catastrophic response to
Hmm.
something that we don't need to have a catastrophic response to. And that, like, that's undue stress for us.
Right. And it's easily avoidable because
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say easily, and I also don't want to put the burden on the woman, but it
Hmm.
is avoidable. And it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily cost the employer so much money to offer educational webinars on menopause or
Hmm.
to offer access to a thermostat, things like that, that are
Right.
really quite accessible for the employer, make all the difference for the woman experiencing it. And there are huge implications for when she says, I just can't deal with this anymore, I'm going to quit. There's her
Yeah.
financial security, her independence, impacts on the economy, on her sense of self and identity. And we can avoid that. We don't have to just suck it up. We don't have to quit because we can't handle it. We can make change and get the care that we need.
Right. Right. I work with a lot of women who are one of very few, if not the only woman on a team
Mm.
working with mostly males and male leaders and in tech. What is your advice to women who are in mostly rooms of men, and in terms of advocating for themselves or trying to get their company on board to be supportive of women in this season?
I have a few ideas. So I will say that first of all, every man knows a woman going through menopause. Could be their
Mhm.
wife or partner, a
Right.
sister, their mother, their daughter, their friend.
Right.
So let's not keep this in the shadows as something that only women have to deal with. This is a human health issue, and we should all get comfortable talking about it and just normalizing it, including the symptoms and impact of it. On a less sort of humanistic level, if you talk dollars and cents, it makes sense to support women in menopause. You don't want to lose talent. You want to be able to attract and retain talent. It's a lot more expensive for the employer to hire someone to replace the woman at the top of her career who feels like she just has to leave.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for, of course, for women to have a seat at the table. And if this is what is going to take to keep them there, then by all means, this should be invested into. I think it's also important for companies to look at what peers are doing, which 15% or so about of companies are offering menopause benefits. Hopefully that number continues to grow. We're obviously grappling with some DE&I
Mhm.
issues right now, but this is a human issue that we
Yeah.
should support.
Well, I mean, if you have something that in some way is going to it's going to impact 100% of your workforce if it impacts 50%. So 50% of
Yes.
if your workforce is 50% women,
Hmm.
then if 50% of the population is impacted by something, that's going to impact the other 50%. So it's not like this is just
It's
like a
not
tiny
niche.
sliver, right? It's not niche, right? It's not just a tiny sliver. And I mean, even if it was a tiny sliver, I would hope that we would care enough to be supportive, but it's not a tiny sliver. And to your point around the cost of not addressing it, the cost of replacing someone, what I'm finding in coaching sessions and more is that in women who work in places that are where they're on mostly male teams or in mostly male leadership, is that their willingness to just accept, kind of mediocre behavior, mediocre attitudes, mediocre benefits, or completely to be dismissed, like they're unwilling to keep accepting it. And it's interesting over the last few years as I've worked with clients that people will come to me feeling stuck in certain ways or feeling, like they want to, with certain professional goals. And the women in these situations where they're often one of the only, if not the one of a few or the only women in the room, they are feeling more and more like, I just want to leave the room. Like, I don't need to be the person to stay and make change. I don't need I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I would rather just go find the place where I'm going to be supported. This is like, I don't need to be, it's not my job to educate these guys. They need to figure this out on their own. And to your point around the cost of every woman that leaves, that's a massive cost. That's a far greater cost than figuring out how do we make accommodations for something that impacts the entire workforce in one way or another.
Right. Accommodations and education.
Yeah.
Education was something that millennials in particular, but all women are saying that they want from their workforce. And that's pretty easy to offer. So it's really past time for companies to get on board with this.
Right. Yeah. We also know from the disability community that when we make accommodations, that oftentimes the accommodations that we make that improve circumstances for one group of people can improve circumstances for many people.
Yeah.
So when we have education around something that impacts women primarily, or make accommodations for something that impacts women primarily, it can also be a positive impact for men. So I'm thinking like men might also want a thermostat in the room.
Sure.
Like women aren't the only ones who get hot sometimes.
Right. Or paid leave to go to the doctor. I mean, this is not rocket science.
Right.
This is, one would argue human rights.
Right. And I think that we sometimes get caught up in like, well, it only impacts certain people or blah, blah, blah. And I've learned a lot about this from parents who have children, neurodiverse children, in learning about like how do we make shifts in education and accommodations in school environments that positively impact kids who are neurodiverse, but ultimately really positively impact everyone in the room. And I'm thinking about this so much in what you've shared that we all can win from this. It's not like we're giving special resources that will only benefit one group.
Total. It's a win-win, honestly.
Yeah. If you could wave a magic wand and change anything about menopause, perimenopause, women in the workplace, what would it be?
It would be related to the attitude around flexibility, whether it's remote work or flexible schedules. And this does apply to everyone, however old you are, wherever you are in your healthcare, menopause journey, parenting journey, whatever it is. I think that women in particular, we know, have been impacted by the return to office policies. We've seen millions of women drop out of the workforce just in the last quarter. And it doesn't have to be this way. And so we know that women experiencing menopause symptoms would appreciate flexibility and autonomy to be adults that they are. And I think that we've seen it work. We saw it work with COVID, and we know it can work. We know it will retain talent. So I wish for that for our workforce.
Yeah. You use the word autonomy. And when I think of autonomy in the workplace, I always also think of trust, because I think that when trust is present, then autonomy is like the natural next step. If my employer trusts me, then I will be granted more autonomy. And I think that there's often this lack of trust. And I don't think the lack of trust comes from women not performing well, or like
Right.
it's kind of like this misplaced punishment that we have to prove and overprove ourselves in order to get autonomy, which doesn't make a ton of sense. If
Well, it's the patriarchy.
exactly, yes,
Yeah.
yes, and men don't have to do that,
Right.
but we're all suffering under these consequences. And return to work being one of the primary ones. When we look at flexibility, and it's interesting, I'm in Seattle here. So in Seattle tech, especially, like lots of RTO stuff happening. And it's as we're nearing the end of, and this has happened over the last few years, like as we near the end of a calendar year, policies are being announced for the upcoming year. And so even more have been announced just this week. I believe Microsoft announced like return to work, 5-day RTO, I think starting in February of 2026. And when we look at these rollouts, what are your thoughts on how this is moving us forward or not, in terms of accommodating for anyone's needs?
Laughing because it's not moving us forward. And by the way, I work with a lot of women in their 20s who don't have kids, and they do appreciate the in-person mentorship, et cetera. So I'm not saying get rid of offices, but
Yeah.
there's clearly a way to collaborate and create a space for in-person work and also autonomy and flexibility. And I think, good luck to Microsoft. I think, unfortunately, we will see and continue to see a lot of women and caregivers dropping out or reducing their hours, which has tremendous implications for gender equity and
Yes.
economic growth on a macro and micro level. And
Right.
they're not good implications, to be
No. And this is what we started to see in 2020 when we saw
clear.
women leaving in droves. And then we look at the numbers coming out in subsequent years of women moving up in leadership and in smaller numbers. And what are the long-term impacts of that? And what are the, for pay equity, what does that look like? And so, women are going to be, for decades now, will be statistically making less money than male counterparts as a result of choosing to leave the workforce, because of what happened in the pandemic, and now because of what's happening as a result of kind of continued fallout from that. When we think about millennials and menopause and advocacy, why should millennials care about menopausal policies, and how can we get involved in a way that creates, with all of our free time, how can we get involved in being advocates for change or advocates for evolution in this process?
So an easy way with all of our free time to contribute is by talking about these issues. I'm not saying
Yeah,
you need to tell everyone all of
right.
your period issues. You can, because it's normal, but just talk about it. You read a good book, you read an article, you saw
Right.
something, you want to talk about it. It's very normal. And when we normalize issues like these, we create positive change and less isolation and stress. I would say certainly advocate for policies in your workplace before you urgently need them. And if you're a leader or an intern, ask around. What are other companies doing? What does our own company need? This is going to be an ongoing conversation, but it's not a difficult one. And employers can send out surveys, things like that. And millennials should really be voting for politicians who make healthcare policies that impact them. We've seen a few states pass. Rhode Island just passed a bill about
I
menopause in the
just saw
workplace.
this yesterday. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead and share what
No,
the
no,
bill was.
it's starting
Yeah.
slowly. California, New York, New Jersey are considering some bills. They're not going to solve everything, but they're a step in the right direction. And of course, we need people to write to their local representatives in support of these bills. There's an organization called Let's Talk Menopause, and they make things really easy around menopause advocacy when it comes to legislation. You can easily sign your name. You can download, toolkits, things like that. So I believe that goes back to talking and education, and it's never too early or too late to start with those.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we think, oh, I have to make a sign and go like protest somewhere, which I love doing, but I understand that's not everyone's thing. Or we think we think sometimes the advocacy has to look like something really big or really time consuming or energetically, draining. And it really can just be sharing your experience, and it can be sharing your experience in ways that are authentic to you. And so, for you and me to get behind a microphone and talk about this in a public forum, or for you to write a book, like that's your way of expressing yourself in a way that feels good to you. But it can also look like sitting in a room with 2 or 3 other people and sharing something that you're experiencing and letting that be the impact of someone else understanding, whether it's a room, whether there's men in the room who are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know, or there's other women who are saying, oh my gosh, me too. That creating awareness and normalizing the conversation goes so far. And I'm noticing like every time I bring this up, and I'm typically in rooms of women, but every time I bring it up, like people just want to dive into this, to learn more, to understand the impacts to them, to get information, to like, it is something that I don't find people are shying away from. And if people in your situation, if you find you open up the conversation and people do shy away from what you want to talk about, that's probably valuable information for you to have.
For sure.
Like that's feedback you probably need.
Right. And also you don't have to tell your own personal journey if you don't want to, but you can share, oh, I heard this, or my mother went through this, or I saw a TV show where they mentioned it. This is such a universal experience. There are plenty of experiences to pull from, and you don't have to have such a connection to it to care about it, right? And that's why men, non-binary, older people and younger people should be caring about this, because it impacts people.
Absolutely. I have a really good friend who is also a speaker, and she was on stage probably a year ago. She told me that she got on stage and within like 30 seconds, I think it was like a room of like 1,000 people. Within like 30 seconds, she was like, oh, I'm totally having a hot flash. And it was a big corporate setting, room of men and women. And she right away, she's like, oh, there's no way I can stand up here for an hour with like full blazer and like high heels and everything. So she literally like kicked off her heels and was barefoot, took off her blazer, and she's like, I'm sorry. And then she grabbed her paper and she was like fanning herself. She's like, I'm sorry, I'm having a hot flash. So we're just going to take a moment while I get myself comfortable on stage. And she like, that's how she started as a leader, opening up her conversation in a room full of strangers. And she said the feedback she got afterwards was just like unlike anything she's ever experienced before. And I thought, what's the message that everyone in that room just got? So the women in the room just got the message that like, it's okay to say if I'm dying in the middle of a hot flash. The men in the room just got the message that like, oh, okay. Well, so when a hot flash happens, a woman might need a minute to like recollect herself, and then she can be 100% on top of her game and own the freaking room. Like, I thought the whole thing was just such a beautiful lesson to everyone in the room, and a reminder that we don't have to just be like inside, as all of us probably have been at some point. Like, I'm uncomfortable in this moment and I don't want anyone to know I'm uncomfortable. So I'm just going to suffer so much that like I can't even show up fully or be as, be as impactful as I want to be because of the suffering.
Yeah. Good for her. That's a beautiful story.
When we think about men and advocacy, how can men get involved in advocating for women related to menopause policy and reproductive health policy in the workplace?
Well, remember that men know women who are going to experience menopause. Not every woman becomes a mother or wants to be, but these are issues that impact men, and they should be our partners and our allies. And like you were saying before, some of the things that might help women when it comes to access to healthcare or normalizing healthcare issues, those can also help men too, or simply saving money on hiring, replacing talent. So men can get involved by talking about it, by asking, how are you doing? By being safe spaces for women to come to, whether they're managers or spouses. If it is someone in their personal life, I've heard from countless husbands and brothers who have sort of stepped up when the woman in their life has been having a tough time and struggling, and the men will say, here are some resources, or I'll go with you to the doctor. And of course, funding research and, again, voting and caring about elected officials who care about these issues. That's certainly an area of men where men can participate.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that just came to mind is I'm thinking about how I would feel if I was sitting in a meeting, or if I was sitting in a room about to start a meeting and a man in the room were to say something like, um, does anyone want me to adjust the temperature in the room before we get started?
Mm-hmm.
Like something little like that. Or like, does anyone need to get
Cold
more
water.
ice water? Like,
Yeah.
so it doesn't need to be this, like, is anyone having a hot flash right now before we get,
Right.
like, it doesn't need to be like
Exactly.
some weird, but like a question that shows, like, I'm thinking about the experiences that other people might be having right now.
Mm-hmm.
And how can I just demonstrate that I'm being thoughtful? And so I think, again, advocacy can look like getting involved in policy kind of things, but it can also just be being a thoughtful human in tiny little moments that signal to other people in the room, like, hey, I got you. I'm thinking about this. It's on my radar. And I think that those kinds of things for me, and I'm always like trying to read cues from people, like, is this my person? Is this not my person? Is this person safe? Can I trust them? And I think those kinds of cues go such a long way in recognizing, like, oh, that's a trustworthy person. That's a person that has my back.
I totally agree. There's a chapter in my book specifically for men, and one of the subtitles is "Don't be a dickhead." Excuse my
I
language.
love it.
Because even if you don't have it in you to ask about the thermostat, which you should, but even if you don't, at the very least, if someone is hot flashing or talking about it in front of you, respond in a kind way. Don't make fun of it. It's not something that she should be ashamed of. And so just create a culture of care. It's not that hard.
I love that. Yes, creating a culture of care, which is like being a compassionate human, having empathy, having emotional intelligence.
Don't be a dickhead.
Don't be a dickhead. That's like the headline for sure. For sure. So, okay, what are some action steps based on everything that we've said here? What would any first steps that you would want a woman who's listening to this, who's like, oh my gosh, I think that I might need support in my workplace? What's one or two steps that you would like to encourage her to take first?
Sure. So read my book, Millennial Menopause, Preparing for Perimenopause, Menopause, and Life's Next Period. I give a ton of ideas, strategies, resources like telehealth platforms that access patients in all parts of the country, et cetera. And the Menopause Society, which I mentioned earlier, is the prominent professional organization of healthcare providers, but they also have a program for menopause at work. And they give so many free resources, many of which I cite to in the book, about having conversations with your employer. And I would certainly start there. There are workplace strategists like my friend Casey Fleming, who helps with these issues. Midovia and the Menopause Center are also programs that focus specifically on these issues. It's not rocket science, like we said earlier. It's okay that employers might need a little help or templates or language around the policies that they should offer and personalize. But for the woman who is saying, I think I need to bring this to my workplace, you are not alone. There are so many resources available, and I'm also happy to help point you in the right direction if you need.
Thank you so much for that. I love I love everything that you just said. And I wanted to just highlight as resources, online platforms, which is something because I have a doctor who's really done a great job meeting me where I'm at and supporting me. I haven't needed to rely on online platforms for medical care around menopause, but I know people who have and who have had great experiences. And so I'm so glad that you mentioned that this is a topic you bring up in your book and point people to places that can be supportive. I know there's a number of them, anywhere from free to paid, that can be really helpful for women. I'm also going to link up in the show notes the Menopause Society, which you mentioned, and also you mentioned Let's Talk Menopause. So those organizations. Before we totally wrap, can you tell us how you are currently showing up as a shameless leader?
I'm talking about menopause and reproductive health care and periods everywhere and to anyone.
And in a time and a place where it's just increasingly dangerous and Risky and high stakes, even though it shouldn't be.
Come at me. I'm ready.
Right? Same.
And it's funny because I've been talking about it for a while. I, in college, was in the play The Vagina Monologues, and my skit was particularly about periods, actually. So in many ways, this book is like a culmination of my life's work and passion, but I'll continue to talk about it. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I feel like your people who knew you in college must be like, of course she wrote a book about menopause.
My
Obvious
friends
next
have
step.
said, oh, this is your childhood dream, writing a book, talking about women's health, helping women through this way. And it's true. It's really cool.
I love it. I love it so much. Oh my gosh. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for everything that you've shared today. I know that there's going to be women who listen to this who feel like they have a new path of hope, that they have a lifeline, that they have some clear, simple, obvious next steps that they can take to support themselves, to support others in their workplace. I know there's men who will listen to this who will also feel like, oh, here's how I can be supportive. Here's how I can not be a dickhead. So thank you for all of that. Tell people where they can find you, where they can find the book, follow you on social, and all those good things.
Sure. So I live in New York, and I'm doing a lot of events here and in Miami and Denver and all sorts of places, plus virtually. So if you go to millennialmenopause.com, you'll see my book tour. You'll be able to get the book wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And if you need therapeutic help or any sort of consulting, just reach out, Lauren@thecounselor.com. The Counselor is also my Instagram handle. It's counselor, but LAUR for Lauren, because we love puns.
Love it. So we will link all that up in the show notes. If people go to sarahdean.com/podcast, click on the episode with Lauren Tetenbaum, and you'll get all those goodies. Or if you just go to your podcast platform where you're listening right now, there's show notes attached to this episode, which will have all those links as well. Lauren, thank you for being here. When you write the next book, please come back again. We'd love to have you. I always like to invite people to keep writing books. So
I love that.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing me to spend time in your ear today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to this channel. To learn more about my speaking, training, and coaching services, visit sarahdean.com. That's SARADEAN. I would also love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn at sarahdean.com/LinkedIn or on Instagram at sarahdeanspeaks. I love hearing from my listeners. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding space for you today and every single day.